Dear Patriots, before the news starts, please subscribe to our patriotic channel by clicking the subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up to this video. Don't forget to leave your opinion below in the comments section. Share the news on Facebook and Twitter so your friends see it. Thank you.
Senate Democrats pitch repeal of tax cuts to fund infrastructure. Senate Democrats unveiled on Wednesday a $1 trillion infrastructure plan that would be funded by repealing numerous tax cuts Republicans pushed through Congress last year. The plan would return the top individual tax rate to 39.6%, set the corporate tax rate at 25%, go back to 2017 law for the alternative minimum tax, undo the exemption increase for the estate tax and end the beneficial tax treatment of carried interest. Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said the plan would fund investments in roads, bridges, schools, airports and universal high-speed internet, among other things. "We want to roll back the Republican tax giveaways to big corporations and the wealthy and invest that money instead in job-creating infrastructure," Schumer said at a press conference with several senior Senate Democrats. With Republicans in control of Congress, the plan is mostly a political marker for the midterm elections. Apropos of this fall, not only will we have a sharp contrast between them and us, but we'll be able to say, look at all the missed opportunities, starting with repatriation, where we were for bipartisanship and they basically opted for partisanship through reconciliation, said Ron Wyden of Oregon, the top Democrat on the Finance Committee. The Rate Coalition, a group of corporations that backed the GOP tax bill, H.R. 115, blasted the Democrats' plan, saying it would raise the tax rate responsible for putting more money in the pockets of over 4 million Americans. "Our new competitive edge would vanish under this plan, and its effective 29% corporate rate would once again make the United States home to one of the highest tax burdens. America's foreign competitors are undoubtedly cheering today's development," the groups said in a statement Wednesday. Trump is losing the trade war with China. There's already a trade war, and it's being waged by Beijing. China's ascension to the World Trade Organization nearly 20 years ago has failed in its large-scale strategic objectives. It hasn't created a liberalizing regime or a free market economy in China. In fact, it hasn't even created a China ready and willing to abide by the norms of free trade. The regime of Xi Jinping, who increasingly looks like president for life, hasn't been pushed toward democratic reforms by a rising middle class. He has centralized power and written Xi Jinping thought, challenging Western liberalism, into the constitution. China still champions state-led, rather than market-led, capitalism. It has no rule of law, and the government suffuses the economy such that the distinction between state-owned enterprises and purportedly private sector firms is fuzzy. A country that has a 13th five-year plan for science and technology is probably not robustly free market. As for trade, China has taken advantage of the WTO to push mercantilist policies. It uses non-tariff barriers in industrial policy the WTO wasn't built to address to maximize exports and minimize imports. President Donald Trump's prospective tariffs on steel and aluminum have put renewed focus on China trade, although the tariffs, at least as announced by Trump, are a comically inept misfire if their true target is China. The rubric for the levies could be, how to lose a trade war with China in one easy step. The tariffs don't really affect China, from which we import only about 3% of our steel. Meanwhile, they send the message that the U.S. government is lurching toward protectionism under risible pretenses, the idea that the tariffs are necessary to national security, when the largest importer of steel to the U.S. is Canada, is laughable. And they alienate allies. If the motivation is simply to protect select domestic firms from competition, whatever the knock-on consequences, the tariffs make sense. Otherwise, they run exactly counter to what would be a sound approach to Chinese mercantilism, as a compelling report by the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation underscores. The report argues that there are two ways to wave the white flag on China trade: 1. favored by the Washington establishment, is to accept Chinese cheating as the way of the world. The other, perhaps favored by Trump, is to adopt a mercantilism of our own. Both would concede to the Chinese an outsized role in forging new, less desirable rules of the road in the global trading system and poorly serve America's interests. A better approach begins with acknowledging that China is unique, and a unique problem. For all of Trump's complaints, Mexico isn't pursuing a well-honed strategic agenda of exploiting the global trade system at the same time it undertakes an aggressive neo-imperialist foreign policy. Only China is doing that. China isn't the first developing country to adopt a policy of maximizing exports. What makes it different is its sheer ambition and its size, which gives it leverage over foreign companies seeking access to its market and international influence. As the ITIF report notes, China effectively pressures countries like Indonesia, Malaysia and Vietnam to ape its unfair practices. What's the harm to the US? Yes, technology accounts for a large share of job losses in manufacturing in recent decades. Yes, lower-end manufacturing would have left our shores regardless. But there is no doubt that China's practices have harmed the US manufacturing sector, and that Beijing works to block higher value-added exports from the US and is pursuing a comprehensive strategy to dominate in advanced industries. By no means should we emulate China. We should continue to pursue free trade, as a policy, not as a theology that prevents us from acknowledging that there is such a thing as unfair trade and that there are practical ways to respond to it. The ITIF report urges using a global free trade regime against China. That means bringing more actions against China in the WTO and working to update the rules to capture Chinese cheating, and to begin thinking of a new organization if the WTO proves inadequate. It means joining, and influencing, a multilateral agreement like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It means forging bilateral agreements with up-to-date standards that reinforce principles that China undermines. A failure, the authors write, to complete and to implement next-generation trade agreements that establish higher standard rules, principles, and norms for market-based global trade will only cede the terms and structure of global trade to Chinese leadership. We obviously can't do this alone. We'd have to lead an alliance of international partners to pressure China on specific practices, with tailored consequences if we get nowhere. There is obviously no chance of doing this if we are engaged in an absurd retaliatory cycle of tit-for-tat tariffs with the likes of Canada and the EU. Such a board-based effort to crack China's mercantilism wouldn't be protectionist, but the opposite. It would aim to foreclose Xi's ridiculous pose as the defender of globalization. Pursuing protectionism is like locking oneself in a dark room, Xi preaches to international audiences while systematically stealing foreign technology and plotting his 21st century autarky. Trump can have emotionally satisfying, blunderbuss tariffs to scratch his protectionist itch, or he can have a strategy to muster an alliance of truly free trade partners to pressure China. He can't have both, and you can be sure China knows which option it prefers. Rich Lowry is editor of National Review and a contributing editor with Politico magazine. Planned Parenthood defunding threatens government spending package. House Republicans are demanding a series of controversial abortion and health care policies in the annual health spending bill, setting up a showdown with Democrats and threatening passage of an omnibus spending package to keep the government open. Democrats are vowing to block the slew of long-sought conservative priorities. The writers would cut off federal funding to Planned Parenthood, eliminate a federal family planning program and axe the teen pregnancy prevention program, according to sources on Capitol Hill. Republicans also want to insert a new prohibition on funding research that uses human fetal tissue obtained after an abortion. The dispute has stalled negotiations on other health issues, such as how much to spend on the opioid epidemic, and prompted discussions about buying negotiators more time, with short-term government funding set to expire on March 23 and many of Congress' other spending panels nearly finished with their bills. Democrats say an agreement was near on overall funding levels for the fiscal 2018 Labor Health and Human Services funding measure, typically one of the most contentious spending bills. But when top appropriators met to finalize the numbers, the Democrats said Republicans reneged on women's health issues, according to Democratic sources familiar with the talks. Those sudden demands stunned the top Democrats in the room: Rep. Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut and Senator Patty Murray of Washington, who until then thought they were having productive talks with their GOP counterparts. Representative Tom Cole, Republican Oklahoma, who leads the House Labor HHS spending panel, has acknowledged that a delay in talks could force another short-term spending patch. Congress must approve new government funding by March 23 or risk a third shutdown this year. That breakdown would be a blow to House GOP leaders, who have worked closely with appropriators to ensure each of the 12 panels in charge of discretionary spending finish ahead of that deadline to avoid any 11th-hour brinkmanship. Top Democrats, including Murray, say they will block the GOP women's health riders. President Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence have made absolutely clear they intend to interfere every way they can with a woman's freedom to make the health care decisions that are right for her, and I've consistently made clear that undermining women's health and expanding restrictions on women's access to the full range of reproductive health care, including at trusted providers like Planned Parenthood, is a complete non-starter, Murray said. House Appropriations Committee spokeswoman Jennifer Hing declined to comment on the policy riders. The committee does not comment or speculate on funding or policy items that may or may not be included in future bills, she said. Senator Roy Blunt, RMO, Cole's counterpart in the Senate, confirmed to reporters this week that he was pushing for the conservative language on women's health issues. But he also suggested that House Republicans may have to stand down and accept the conditions of last year's spending package, which didn't include the riders. I'd like most of the House language better on those issues. But you could go back to last year's language and resolve most of those issues as well, Blunt said. Most appropriators, including Republicans, thought that they could sidestep the most contentious policy fights, believing the Trump administration could codify through regulations those policies that couldn't get past congressional Democrats. The Trump administration has already eliminated funding for the Teen Pregnancy Prevention Program, prompting a lawsuit from health care providers. But the administration signaled just last month that it wants to preserve the Title X Family Planning Program, a portfolio the House GOP wants to kill. Senior Trump health officials at HHS released the new application for Title X funding and stressed the program's importance. The administration wants to expand the program to abstinence education programs and faith-based groups, reversing the Obama administration's goal of providing all FDA-approved forms of contraception. The Planned Parenthood defunding goes beyond previous GOP restrictions aimed at the group, which supports abortion rights and has long been the object of government shutdown fights. The organization would be cut off from all forms of federal funding, including Medicaid, Title X and maternal health programs. Republicans previously tried to exclude Planned Parenthood only from Medicaid. The proposed fetal tissue ban could have an impact on research into Zika, some of which relies on tissue of fetuses that had microcephaly, the disease caused by the Zika virus. Republicans also want to use the funding bill to go after Obamacare. They would prohibit funding for administering or enforcing the health care law, bar the administration from collecting a fee from insurance companies to run the insurance exchanges, and eliminate more than $500 million in funding for managing the program at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Jennifer Schultz contributed to this report. Ousted White House drug policy aide joins HUD. President Donald Trump's former liaison to the Office of National Drug Control Policy, who was pushed out after questions surfaced about his lack of experience, has joined the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Taylor Waynath will serve as a mid-level official in the Office of Community Planning and Development, according to HUD spokesman Raphael Williams. He will focus on opioid policy, Williams said. Waynath, a one-time Trump campaign aide, was forced to step down from his White House post in January after inconsistencies in his resume were revealed. A Washington Post story detailed his rise to influence within the Trump White House despite a lack of work experience. Wayne will start at HUD as a General Schedule 9 employee. Williams had no immediate explanation for Wayne's hiring,